Hi, I'm Kara Pack, and this is my Module 16 case study for EDL 854, Case of the Missing Booster Club Funds. Category 1, Problem Identification and Data Analysis. So in this case study, it involved missing funds from ticket sales for a middle school basketball game. Mrs. Bowman is a parent of a 7th grade student named Lucy, and she was one of the parent volunteers who was selling tickets to that game. At the end of the night, when she turned the inventory and the money to Mr. Stevens, the principal, she reported that 10 tickets were damaged. But when Mr. Stevens went to reconcile the money, he noticed that the inventory for the tickets sold did not balance out with the money in the bag. He also noticed that there was a $50 bill not in the cash bag, but he knows that a $50 bill was used to purchase tickets because he had a conversation with Mr. Dumas, a community member, earlier about how he had to use a $50 bill to buy his ticket into the game because he had just cashed his check. So the problem is that the $50 bill is missing, the inventory did not reconcile with the money in the bag, and there's possibility of theft or stolen money or missing money. What do I know right now? Right now, I know that Mrs. Bowman is in need of money because she would like to send her daughter Lucy to march in a parade with other all-star cheerleaders. Earlier, she had scheduled a meeting with Mr. Stevens asking for PTA to provide money for Lucy's airfare and hotel and meals so that she could go to this parade. Her request was denied by Mr. Stevens, and she was upset about that because money is tight in the community that they live in, and she didn't have the money to send her daughter to that parade. I also know that Mr. Dumas, the community member, used a $50 bill to purchase his ticket. Like I said before, he had just cashed his check, so that was the smallest bill he had to buy his ticket into the basketball game. At the end of the evening, when Mr. Stevens counted the money, the $50 bill was not in the cash bag. And I know that Mr. Stevens did not oversee the collection of the funds from ticket or concession sales throughout the evening. It mentioned that there was no other administrator there, so he was busy doing other things, and he relied on the parent volunteers to handle the collection of the funds, and he did not ask them to count it before it was turned in to him. What do I still need to know? I need to know, did Mrs. Bowman ever turn in those tickets that she claimed were torn? It also mentioned that there were 4 parent volunteers total, 2 working concessions and 2 working ticket sales. So I know Mrs. Bowman was one of the ticket takers, but I don't know who the other adult was. I don't know, did Mrs. Bowman or the other ticket taker remember Mr. Dumas paying with that $50 bill? Were there any bills over $50 that maybe somebody else used to buy their ticket, and therefore they used that $50 bill to give change back to that individual? I need to know, was the money kept in a locked, safe, secure location the entire evening? And I also need to know, when Mrs. Bowman set up that meeting with Mr. Stevens and requested for PTA to fund her daughter's trip, why Mr. Stevens, the principal, made that decision on behalf of PTA instead of letting the PTA organization make the decision for them. Category 2, plan of action with strategies for implementation. So my plan of action would include an investigation to find out who that other ticket taker was that evening and ask if they remember seeing those damaged tickets that Mrs. Bowman claimed there were. And also, do they remember Mr. Dumas using a $50 bill to buy his ticket? I would also need to have a follow-up conversation with Mrs. Bowman about the torn tickets, asking where they were if she did not turn them in, and ask her if she remembers Mr. Dumas using that $50 bill to buy his ticket. I would also ask Mr. Dumas if he remembers who he bought his ticket from. Was it Mrs. Bowman or was it the other adult at the table? I would also need to create and implement new procedures for the handling of funds at school events, making sure that a supervisor is present at all time, also requesting that those parent volunteers count the money at the end of the evening with that supervisor there before they turn it into Mr. Stevens to count. And then I would also need to contact that district office and let them know that there are some funds missing. Category 3, resolve the issues promoting the success of all students. So the issue resolution, we can resolve it by creating these policies for fund collecting, making sure that we have those safeguards in place, and also go over those policies with everyone involved so that they know who's responsible for what. Since there is no other administrator in the building to help at these events, I would need, as the principal, to pick a staff member to be the athletic event supervisor, and they would oversee the collection of the funds, making sure things are being done the safe and proper ethical way. And then also being present when they count the money at the end of the night and reconcile it with their inventory. And then I would do the same thing with Mr. Stevens. Once the funds got transferred to the supervisor, then it would be transferred to the principal and they again would count it. I would need to create an agreement that describes what the roles are before, during, and after the events for the supervisor, for the bookkeeper, for the principal, and for parent volunteers, and then make sure that everyone signs that agreement saying that they would abide by those rules and uphold their responsibilities. If Mrs. Bowman did in fact take that money, then consequences would have to be handed out, which could include repayment of the funds, prosecution, and then definitely making sure that she's not allowed to handle funds for the school or for PTA anymore. And another resolution is making sure that we have clear roles between the school and the PTA, and knowing that the principal should only serve as in an advisory capacity, and that he should not be making decisions on behalf of PTA, that they need to make those financial decisions on their own. Category 4, debrief the problem. When I was going through this case study, some of the things I was thinking, Mr. Stevens did not hold up his responsibilities as the administrator. He did not supervise throughout the event the handling of funds. It didn't seem like they had procedures in place. No supervisor was appointed. I was also thinking those controls need to be in place to help prevent things from like this happening, prevent that theft and that loss that could take place. I was also thinking that PTA should have made that decision on whether or not to fund Lucy's trip. It shouldn't have been Mr. Stevens' decision. I was feeling empathetic to Mrs. Bowman's financial situation. I know this is a wonderful opportunity for her daughter, and times are tough for their community, and she didn't have that money, and I was feeling sorry for her that she wasn't able to provide that opportunity for her. I was also feeling frustrated that there wasn't a second administrator there to help, or a supervisor, a staff-appointed supervisor, to oversee those funds being handled. And I was upset about the theft because that's essentially taking money from the school and from the students. I was valuing all the parent and community support. Even though money is tight in that community, there is a ton of support, which is always appreciated by the school. I was also valuing the time and effort it takes to handle all those funds. I know sometimes it might seem tedious to have someone count it and then someone else to count it and have, 2, 3 sets of eyes recounting that money, but it really is just to help prevent errors from happening. And then also valuing the effectiveness of having those safeguards. If we could have those in place, it would prevent a lot of these errors from occurring. Some unresolved issues that still need further investigating would be, where are the missing funds? We would have to see if we could locate them. Also, what would the consequences be for whoever took them? And then just really reestablishing those roles and responsibilities of both the PTA and the administrator and making sure that they're separate. Reflecting on Standard 8, component number 1 is making sure of where in the case study did they promote effective and efficient management of the school or the district. It showed that they were able to do this because they had those pre-numbered tickets at place and an inventory system for the concession items. The money was given to Mr. Stevens to count, and he was escorted by security to make his deposit, which was a safe control that they had in place. And then also Mr. Stevens reconciled the money with the number of tickets concessions sold. So he was using a checks and balance system to make sure that things balanced out. Component number 2, how did they promote the social learning of every student? It was apparent that Mr. Stevens has a good relationship with those families of his students. This was shown by the trust that he instills in his parent volunteers. He gave them a lot of responsibilities and he trusted them to do the right thing. It was also apparent that Mr. Stevens values the community support of the school. This was shown through his interactions with Mr. Dumas. He was very excited for him to come, and he thanked him for being a part and supporting the school. And then Mr. Stevens also strives to support all his students. He was very proud of Lucy and her accomplishments, that he made sure to include it in one of his daily announcements so that everyone in the school could recognize all the hard work she had put in. And component 3, how did they promote the student academic learning? Mr. Stevens understands that it's important to have that strong community school relationship. This is shown through the reading program that they had, the Reading Buddies program, and then all the volunteers at the school. Even though the parents may not be able to provide a lot of monetary support to the school, they try to give their time to help the school out. When you have that strong community school relationship, it really does help further student achievement. The fundraisers are put on by the PTA and the Booster Club, and they raise those funds to help support the students' learning and their achievement. And then also just that it mentioned that there was a large crowd. It was the last home game of the season, and they were at capacity. So it showed how that community really rallies behind the school and those students and wants the best for them. So thank